It was one of those sticky Atlanta afternoons when the air feels thick enough to chew, the kind of day where even the pigeons look tired. Inside a quiet bistro tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop, the lunch rush had just begun to settle. The clink of cutlery, low hum of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter from the patio created a rhythm most customers barely noticed. But for the staff, it was the soundtrack to another long shift. Behind the counter, Maya wiped her hands on her apron and took a slow breath. She was 28, with tired eyes that still managed to sparkle when she smiled, which she did often, even on days like this. She'd been on her feet since 9 that morning, and her feet ached in a way that no pair of insoles could fix, but she didn't complain. Not out loud anyway. She was 2 semesters away from finishing nursing school, and every shift at this place brought her closer to that white coat she'd dreamed of since high school. Her mom used to say, "Honey, you were born with a stethoscope in your heart." And even now, years later, those words kept her going through double shifts and ramen dinners. The bistro wasn't fancy, but it had a reputation for good food and even better service. Regulars came for the truffle fries and stayed for the warmth of the staff. Maya knew most of them by name: the retired teacher who always ordered iced tea with extra lemon, the young couple who celebrated every tiny win with a shared chocolate tart, the freelance writer who scribbled in a notebook for hours without ordering more than a black coffee. She remembered allergies, favorite tables, even the names of people's dogs. It wasn't just a job to her. It was part of her story. Then the door chimed. 3 men walked in, suits sharp enough to cut glass, shoes polished to a mirror shine. They carried themselves like they owned the sidewalk outside, maybe the whole block. The hostess, a college student named Lila, gave them her best professional smile and led them to a corner booth near the window. Maya glanced over. She recognized the one in the middle, not by face but by the way he moved, confident to the point of arrogance, like the world had already handed him everything he wanted, and he was just waiting for the receipt. She was right to notice. His name was Julian Cross, founder of Crossline Capital, the kind of guy whose face showed up in business magazines next to headlines like Disruptor or Visionary. But in person, the shine wore off fast. He didn't say thank you when Lila handed him a menu. Didn't look up when Maya approached their table a few minutes later. "Good afternoon," she said, voice steady. Not too bright, not too soft. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" He barely glanced at her. "Sparkling water, no lime. And get my associates iced teas, unsweetened. And hurry up. We've got a call in 20. She nodded, turned, and walked away without a word. No smile, no sigh, just professionalism wrapped in quiet dignity. Back at the drink station, she filled the order carefully. Sparkling water, no lime. 2 unsweetened iced teas. She balanced the tray and returned, setting each glass down with the kind of care most people reserve for fragile heirlooms. When she placed the water in front of him, his eyes flicked up just for a second and then down again. "You're the one who asked if I wanted still or sparkling earlier, right?" "Yes, sir," she said. He let out a short, dry laugh. "Just don't spill it on me. People like you always do." The words landed like a slap. Not loud, not dramatic, but sharp enough to sting. The 2 men with him froze for half a second, then quickly looked at their phones, suddenly very interested in their screens. Maya didn't flinch. Didn't blink too fast. She just stood there, tray in hand, and said, "I'll be right back with your appetizers." She walked away like she hadn't heard it. Like it hadn't cut through her like a cold draft on a summer day. But inside something twisted. Not shame, never shame. Anger, maybe. But mostly disappointment. Not in him, really. In the fact that in 2025, someone could still say something like that in public in a place full of witnesses, and expect it to just disappear. Back in the kitchen, she set the tray down and took a breath. Her coworker Rico gave her a look. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," she said, forcing a small smile. "Just another Tuesday." She didn't tell him what happened. Didn't need to. Rico had been in this business long enough to read the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her jaw. He just nodded and handed her the plates for their table. Seared scallops, a beet salad, and a burger with no pickles, just like the order ticket said. She delivered the food with the same calm precision. No extra words. No lingering. She set each plate down, confirmed everything was correct, and left before anyone could say another careless thing. Julian barely acknowledged her. He was already deep in conversation about market leverage and exit. Strategies, his voice loud enough that half the restaurant could hear. Maya returned to the service station and leaned against the counter for just a moment. Her hands were steady, but her heart wasn't. She thought about her mom, who cleaned offices for 20 years and still said please and thank you to everyone, even the people who never said it back. She thought about her little brother, who wanted to be an engineer and kept a notebook full of designs he was too shy to show anyone. She thought about the patients she'd meet one day, people who'd be scared, in pain, maybe alone, and how she'd treat them with kindness no matter what, because that's who she was. Not because she had to be, but because she chose to be. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. More orders, more refills, more smiles that didn't always reach her eyes. When Julian's table finally left, they left no tip, not even $1. Just a crumpled napkin and a half-finished glass of water. Maya cleared the table without comment. She scraped the plates, stacked the glasses, and moved on to the next task. Later that night, after closing, she sat in her car for a long time before starting the engine. The city lights flickered outside, soft and distant. She thought about quitting. Not because she couldn't handle the work. She could handle anything. But because no one should have to swallow their worth just to keep a job. But then she remembered why she was here. Not just for the paycheck, but for the future waiting on the other side of those nursing exams. For the little girl in the ER who'd need someone gentle to hold her hand. For the elderly man who'd forget his own name but remember the nurse who brought him warm socks. She turned the key, pulled out of the lot, and drove home under a sky full of stars, quiet, steady, and unbroken. The days after that lunch blurred together like watercolors left out in the rain. Maya went back to her routine, early mornings at the clinic for her nursing rotation, afternoons studying in the library, evenings at the bistro. She didn't mention what happened to her classmates or her roommate. Not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't want it to become a story about her being hurt. She'd rather it just disappear, like it never happened. But some things don't vanish just because you stop talking about them. They settle, under your skin, quiet but present, like a bruise you keep forgetting is there, until you bump it again. At the bistro, the staff had long since learned to read each other without words. Rico noticed how Maya double-checked every glass before serving it to certain tables. Lila saw how she avoided the corner booth near the window, even when it was empty. And old Mr. Chen, the dishwasher who'd been there longer than anyone, once caught her staring at a credit card receipt left behind on the counter. She didn't say anything, just folded it carefully and tucked it into the tip jar like it was nothing. But Mr. Chen knew. He'd seen that look before, the kind that says, "I'm not mad, I'm just filing this away." Because the truth was, Julian Cross wasn't new to the bistro. He'd been coming in for over a year, always with different people, clients, junior staff, sometimes alone. And every time there was something off about him. Not loud or violent, just cold. Distant in a way that made people feel small without him ever raising his voice. One time, he sent back a perfectly cooked salmon because the plating looked lazy. Another time, he asked the manager if the staff had proper hygiene training, right in front of everyone during a busy Saturday dinner. He never tipped, not once. But he always charged the full meal to his company card and wrote it off as a business development expense. The owner, a soft-spoken woman named Diane who'd opened the place after her divorce, kept him as a customer because his tab was big. But she'd started scheduling him only on days when Maya wasn't working, just in case. What Maya didn't know was that others had felt the same sting. Lila once overheard him tell a colleague, "These places are only as good as the help, and let's be honest, the help here isn't Ivy League." Rico remembered the time Julian complained that his water glass smelled like the kitchen, as if the scent of hard work was something dirty. Even the delivery guys from the bakery next door rolled their eyes when they saw his car parked out front. But no one said anything. Not really, because in service work, you learn early that your comfort often comes second to someone else's convenience. You smile through the slights, you swallow the comments, you remind yourself it's just a few hours, just a paycheck, just temporary. Still, Maya couldn't shake the phrase, "people like you." It wasn't the first time she'd heard something like that, not by a long shot. But coming from someone who carried himself like he'd never been told no in his life, it landed differently. It wasn't just rude. It felt like a verdict. Like he'd looked at her uniform, her skin, her name tag, and decided she didn't deserve basic respect. She thought about it while taking blood pressure readings at her clinical rotation, thought about it while folding laundry in her tiny apartment, thought about it when she passed a luxury car dealership and saw a man in a navy suit step out of a black sedan, briefcase in hand, and for a split second her stomach dropped, before she realized it wasn't him. She never posted about it online, didn't rant to strangers on social media, didn't even tell her mom, who would have called the bistro owner herself and demanded an apology. Maya wasn't looking for a fight. She just wanted to move forward without carrying that moment like a stone in her pocket. But life has a way of connecting dots you didn't even know were there. One evening, as she was wiping down tables after closing, Diane, the owner, came out from the back office. She held 2 mugs of tea. "Long day?" she asked, handing one to Maya. "Just the usual," Maya replied, though they both knew it wasn't. Diane leaned against the counter, quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I saw what happened last week, with that guy in the navy suit." Maya didn't look up. "It's fine. Really, it's not fine," Diane said gently. "And you don't have to pretend it is." Maya finally met her eyes. There was no pity there, just understanding. Diane had worked her way up from waiting tables in a diner at 16. She knew what it cost to keep your head down. I don't want it to be a thing," Maya said softly. "I've got too much ahead of me to let one arrogant guy steal my peace." Diane nodded. "You're right, he's not worth your energy, but that doesn't mean what he did was okay." They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea as the streetlights outside flickered on. Then Diane added, almost as an afterthought, "Funny thing, he's been in the news lately. His company's trying to buy up a bunch of community clinics, including the one where you do your rotations." Maya froze. "What?" "Yeah. Crossline Capital. Big deal. They're pitching it as modernizing healthcare access, but folks in the neighborhood are nervous. Those clinics are lifelines for people who can't afford fancy hospitals." Maya's mind raced. The clinic where she volunteered, where she'd held the hand of a diabetic patient during her first injection, where she'd helped translate for an elderly immigrant who didn't speak English, was one of them. And the man who'd looked at her like she was invisible was now trying to take it over. She didn't say anything that night, but as she walked to her car, a new thought took root, not of anger, but of clarity. Maybe this wasn't just about one lunch. Maybe it was about who gets to decide what matters, who gets to be seen, who gets to lead. She didn't know it yet, but someone else was about to connect those same dots, someone who'd known her long before she ever picked up a serving tray. And that's when things started to shift. Not with a shout, but with a whisper. Not with revenge, but with truth. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to strike back, but to simply be remembered by the right person, at the right time. Weeks passed and life kept moving. Classes, shifts, late-night study sessions with coffee gone cold. Maya had almost convinced herself she'd put that lunch behind her. She focused on her clinical rotation at the community health center, where the waiting room was always full but the staff never made anyone feel like a number. There she learned how to take vitals with steady hands and listen with her whole presence, not just her ears. She remembered every patient's name, asked about their kids, noticed when someone hadn't eaten that day. It wasn't glamorous work, but it felt real, and real was enough. Then came a Saturday morning when her phone buzzed during a rare moment of quiet. She was sitting on her apartment balcony, wrapped in an old sweater, flipping through flashcards for her pharmacology exam. The caller ID showed a name she hadn't seen in over a year. Evelyn Grant. Her chest tightened just a little. Evelyn wasn't family, but she might as well have been. Back when Maya first started volunteering at the health center, before nursing school, before the bistro, before any of this, Evelyn had been the director. Sharp-eyed, warm-hearted, and the kind of woman who could calm a crying child with just her voice. She'd seen something in Maya early on, not just skill, but sincerity. She'd written her recommendation letter, checked in during tough semesters, even slipped her a grocery gift card once when she heard Maya was skipping meals to save money. Maya answered right away. "Ms. Evelyn?" Everything okay? Everything's fine, sweetheart, came the familiar voice, smooth as honey but with that no-nonsense edge she loved. I just haven't heard your voice in too long. Thought I'd take you to lunch if you're free. Maya almost said no. She was tired, behind on readings, but something in Evelyn's tone made her pause. Sure, she said. I'd like that. They met at a little soul food spot downtown, Evelyn's pick. The kind of place with mismatched chairs, gospel playing low from an old speaker, and cornbread so good it made you close your eyes. Evelyn was already seated when Maya arrived, silver hair pulled back, pearl earrings glinting under the warm lights. She stood up and hugged Maya like she'd been waiting all week to do it. They ordered fried catfish and collard greens, and for a while they just talked about school, about the changing neighborhood, about how Evelyn missed the daily rhythm of the clinic since retiring. Then over sweet tea, Evelyn leaned forward slightly. I've been reviewing some investment proposals lately, she said casually, like she was commenting on the weather. One of them caught my eye. Crossline Capital wants to acquire a network of community clinics, including ours. Maya's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Yeah, and I heard something about that. Evelyn watched her carefully. Their CEO, Julian Cross, he's been in the news. Big on efficiency and scaling impact. Sounds good on paper. But I've been digging deeper. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder. Not dramatic, just a manila envelope with a few printed pages. She slid one across the table. It was a copy of an expense report from Crossline Capital, and there, listed under Client Development Q2, was a $412 charge from the bistro where Maya worked. Date, time, even the server's initials, MR, though Maya knew the manager never put full names on those. Her stomach dropped. Evelyn didn't say anything right away. She just let the silence sit between them, heavy but not cruel. Did something happen? Evelyn finally asked, voice low. Maya looked down at her plate. She didn't want to sound petty. Didn't want this to become a sob story. But Evelyn had always seen through her anyway. He came in a few weeks ago, Maya began, voice steady but quiet. With two others, he was dismissive, rude. At the end, he said something about people like me always spilling things. Like I was careless just for existing. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened slightly. And you handled it like the professional you are. I didn't have a choice, Maya said. If I'd said anything, I might have lost my job. And I can't afford that right now. No, Evelyn agreed. You shouldn't have to choose between your dignity and your rent. They sat for a moment, the hum of the restaurant wrapping around them like a blanket. Then Evelyn closed the folder. I'm not asking because I'm curious, honey. I'm asking because this matters. Leadership isn't just about balance sheets. It's about how you treat the people who can't do anything for you. That man billed a lunch where he disrespected a hardworking server as a business development expense. To him, that's normal. And if that's his normal, what do you think his clinics will feel like for patients who already feel invisible? Maya hadn't thought of it that way. She'd been so focused on surviving the moment that she hadn't seen the bigger picture. That someone like Julian didn't just mistreat waitstaff. He operated from a place that saw certain people as background noise. And if he took over the clinic, that mindset would seep into everything. Shorter appointments, colder interactions, decisions made in boardrooms far from the people they affected. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, Maya admitted. You didn't, Evelyn said gently, but truth doesn't need to be loud to matter. She reached across the table and covered Maya's hand with her own. I'm not going to leak this or start a scandal. That's not how change happens. But as one of the lead reviewers on this deal, I have a responsibility to ask hard questions, and now I know exactly what to ask. Maya felt a strange mix of relief and worry. Will it make things worse for me? Not at all, Evelyn said firmly. Your name won't be mentioned. Your story will be shared only as a pattern, anonymous but real. And sometimes that's enough to make people pause. They finished lunch, the conversation shifting back to lighter things. Evelyn's garden, Maya's upcoming exams, a funny story about a mischievous clinic cat. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Maya didn't feel like a victim anymore. She felt like a witness. And witnesses, when they speak up in the right way, can change the course of things. As they hugged goodbye, Evelyn whispered, You're going to be an incredible nurse. Not just because you're smart, but because you see people, really see them. Maya walked back to her car with her head a little higher. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time since that lunch, she didn't feel alone in it. Someone who mattered had listened. And in a world that often rewards loudness, sometimes the quietest truths are the ones that echo the loudest. The next few days moved quietly. Like the calm before a storm no one can quite see coming. Maya went back to her routine. Early mornings at the clinic, afternoons buried in textbooks, evenings serving tables with the same steady grace she always had. She didn't expect anything to change. She'd told Evelyn what happened, not to stir trouble, but because it felt right to be honest with someone who'd earned her trust. She figured that was the end of it. But behind closed doors, wheels were turning. Evelyn didn't go to the press. She didn't post screenshots online or tag anyone in a viral thread. Instead, she did what she'd done for decades, used her position with care, precision, and quiet authority. As one of the senior advisors reviewing Crossline Capital's proposed acquisition of the Community Health Network, she had a seat at the final due diligence call with the board and major investors. It was a routine meeting on paper, numbers, projections, risk assessments. But Evelyn had other plans. The call began like any other. Voices crisp and professional. Background noise of keyboards tapping, someone sipping coffee. Julian Cross joined 10 minutes late. Traffic, he said, though everyone knew he'd been in his office all morning. He spoke with the same polished confidence that made headlines. Smooth, self-assured, full of buzzwords like synergy and value-driven care. Then Evelyn spoke. "I'd like to shift focus for a moment," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Before we finalize this deal, I think it's important we address company culture, specifically how leadership treats individuals outside the C-suite." A pause. "Not long, but noticeable." Julian chuckled lightly. "Culture's always a priority for us. We've got DEI initiatives, mentorship programs." "I'm not talking about programs," Evelyn interrupted gently. "I'm talking about behavior. Real documented behavior." She didn't raise her voice. Didn't sound angry. "Just factual. For example," she continued, "last month, your company billed a $412 lunch at a local bistro as a client development expense. During that meal, your CEO made a comment to the server, someone working 2 jobs to become a nurse, that people like you always spill things. The server handled it with professionalism, but the incident was witnessed by multiple staff members. Silence stretched across the line. Someone cleared their throat. Julian's tone shifted. "That's taken out of context. It was a stressful day. I didn't mean anything by it." "Meaning isn't just an intent," Evelyn replied. "It's an impact. And when someone in your position speaks that way to service staff, it tells us something about your leadership style. Because if that's how you treat someone serving your lunch, how will you treat patients who rely on your clinics, or the nurses, receptionists, and janitors who keep those clinics running?" She didn't stop there. "I've also reviewed internal feedback from your own team," she added. "High turnover in entry-level roles. Multiple anonymous complaints about dismissive communication. One employee described meetings where junior staff were spoken over so often they stopped contributing altogether." Another pause. Longer this time. Then a new voice. Lisa Cho, one of the lead investors. "Julian, is this accurate? We're a high-performance environment," he said, voice tighter now. "Sometimes that comes across as intense." "Intense isn't the issue," Evelyn said. "Disrespect is." She didn't play a recording. Didn't name Maya. But she did something more powerful. She framed the moment not as an isolated slip, but as part of a pattern. And patterns matter, especially when you're handing someone control over healthcare for vulnerable communities. Within 24 hours, Lisa Cho requested a full cultural audit. 2 other investors quietly pulled back, citing unacceptable leadership risk. By the end of the week, the acquisition was on hold. Then quietly it collapsed. Julian tried to recover. He sent emails, made calls, even issued a vague public statement about recommitting to inclusive values and listening to feedback. But the damage was done. Not because he'd been canceled, but because people who held real power had looked at his behavior and decided he wasn't trustworthy with something as important as people's health. Back at the bistro, no one knew any of this was happening. Maya kept serving, studying, showing up. She didn't hear about the board call, didn't know Evelyn had spoken up. She just noticed that Julian hadn't been back in weeks, and honestly, she was glad. Then one afternoon, as she was restocking napkins, Diane, the owner, came out with a small envelope. "This came for you," she said, handing it over with a knowing look. Inside was a handwritten note from Evelyn. "You were heard, and it mattered. No details, no drama, just those 6 words." Maya read them 3 times. Then she folded the note and tucked it into her nursing textbook, right between chapters on ethics and patient advocacy. She didn't feel triumphant. Didn't feel like she'd won, but she did feel something deeper, seen. Not as a victim, but as a person whose experience carried weight, and that was enough. Meanwhile, across town, Julian sat in his office, blinds half closed, staring at a spreadsheet that no longer added up the way he wanted. His assistant knocked softly. "The board wants to discuss next steps." He nodded but didn't move. For the first time in years, he felt small, not because someone shouted at him, but because his actions had finally caught up with him in a room full of people who refused to look away. Karma, it turned out, didn't need fireworks. Sometimes it just needed one person with the courage to speak truth, and another with the wisdom to listen. Graduation day arrived with soft morning light and the kind of quiet excitement that hums under your skin. The auditorium was filled with families holding bouquets, friends snapping photos, and rows of students in crisp white coats, some still a little too big, others worn with pride. Maya sat near the front, hands folded in her lap, heart steady but full. She'd made it. 2 jobs, sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and still she'd walked every step. In the second row, Evelyn sat with perfect posture, a proud smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She didn't wave or call out. She just watched, eyes bright, like she was witnessing something she'd always known would happen. Beside her sat Maya's mom, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she'd pulled from her sleeve. She hadn't missed a single milestone, not even when she had to take the bus 2 hours each way because her car broke down the week before. When Maya's name was called, she stood, walked across the stage, and accepted her diploma with the same quiet grace she'd shown while serving tables, taking vitals and holding space for strangers in pain. There was no fanfare, no spotlight, but in that moment she felt seen in the truest sense. Not for surviving something cruel, but for becoming exactly who she'd set out to be. After the ceremony, as people milled about hugging and laughing, Evelyn found her. No big speech, just a long embrace and a whisper. "You belong here." Maya nodded, throat tight. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You did it yourself," Evelyn said gently. "I just reminded you that your voice matters." Later that week, Maya started her new role at the community health center, the same one Julian Cross had tried to absorb into his corporate machine. The clinic hadn't changed much on the surface. The same faded posters about hand washing, the same squeaky third chair in the waiting room, the same coffee pot that never quite brewed enough. But now, when she walked through the doors in her white coat, she wasn't a volunteer or a student. She was part of the team, and that meant something. Her first patient was an elderly man with diabetes who'd missed his last 2 appointments because his bus pass ran out. Maya didn't just check his blood sugar. She sat with him, asked about his garden, helped him fill out a form for transportation assistance. He left with a plan, a prescription, and a smile that reached his eyes. That, she thought, is why she'd stayed up late memorizing drug interactions. That's why she'd swallowed her pride that day at the bistro. Not for revenge, but for moments like this. As for Julian, life moved on for him too, just differently. His firm downsized. Key clients drifted to competitors who didn't carry the whiff of controversy. He stopped showing up in business magazines, but he didn't disappear completely. One rainy Tuesday, Maya was grabbing coffee during her lunch break when she saw him. He was sitting alone at a small table near the window of a quiet cafe. Not the bistro, not some fancy steakhouse, just a neighborhood spot with mismatched mugs and a chalkboard menu. He looked older than she remembered. Tired, maybe. His suit was still expensive, but it hung a little looser, like he hadn't been sleeping well. She didn't approach him. Didn't stare. She just ordered her coffee, paid, and walked out. But as she passed his table, she noticed something. His cup had a tip left beside it. Not a grand gesture, just a folded $5 bill tucked under the saucer. And when the barista came by to clear his empty plate, he looked up and said, "Thank you." It wasn't redemption. Not really. But it was a shift. Small, almost invisible, but there. Maya thought about that as she walked back to the clinic, rain tapping softly on her umbrella. She realized then that karma wasn't about watching someone fall. It wasn't about punishment or public shame. It was about balance, about the world quietly correcting itself when someone forgets that every person matters, not for what they can do for you, but simply because they exist. She'd never wanted Julian ruined. She'd just wanted him to see her. And in the end, maybe he had, even if it took losing something valuable to make him look. Back at the clinic, a young girl with a scraped knee waited nervously in exam room 2. Her mom held her hand tightly. Maya knelt down, made eye contact, and smiled. "Hey there. I hear you had a rough day. Want to tell me about it?" The girl nodded slowly, then reached out and touched the stethoscope around Maya's neck. In that moment, none of the past mattered. The slights, the silence, the sting of being treated like background noise. What mattered was this: a child feeling safe, a mother feeling heard, a nurse showing up, not because she had to, but because she chose to. That night, Maya sat on her balcony again, the city lights twinkling below. She opened her nursing textbook, not to study, but to find the note Evelyn had given her. She reread those 6 words. You were heard, and it mattered. She smiled, folded it carefully, and placed it back between the pages. Then she leaned back, wrapped in the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because of what happened to her, but because of who she'd become in spite of it. And somewhere out there, in a world that often rewards loudness and power, a quiet truth remained. Kindness doesn't need applause to be powerful. Respect doesn't need a spotlight to be right. And sometimes the most profound justice isn't delivered with a gavel, but with a steady hand, a listening ear, and the courage to keep showing up day after day for people who need you. Maya took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let the night wrap around her like a promise. The future was wide open, and she was ready for it.